Hi. In his 1996 hit, Neil Diamond asked the question, can anybody hear me? Is anybody out there? Is that how we feel sometimes when we're trying to communicate with our members? I mean, made even crazier by all this virtual space? Well, let's together explore the disconnect in communications and most importantly, how we can overcome it. In this edition of the Leadership Webinar Series, Can Anyone Hear Me? Hi, I'm Peggy Hoffman and I'm with Mariner Management, and I'd like us to explore some strategies that we can take to make a difference. So I want to mention to you that we actually started this conversation in the webinar. The conversation has started, which is available on your volunteer resource portal. It's got some cool ideas about, say, for example, effective email practices. So check that out. I'd like to get us started, though, today in our conversation with an interesting statistic that we spend some 70 to 80% of our waking hours in some form of communications. Now, interestingly, according to those same stats, only about 16% are in reading. And yet most of what we ask our members to do in our communications is read. So I think that that may be perhaps the first disconnect. Now, all of this communications, what channels, what tools, what methods are we using? Well, interestingly enough, emails still rank top, at least in terms of what adults are telling us, 74% of them, in terms of how they prefer their communications with organizations such as their membership organizations. Now, what's interesting is they prefer that, but only about a third of the emails in North America are actually opened. And the reason being, in most cases, is said, well, it's because they're not relevant. 38%, only 38% of them are relevant. That's our second disconnect. As popular as email is, you got to take a look at phone and text. Now, there's a couple of stats here that I really want to point out to you, is that first of all, 78% of the people who text wish they could have a text conversation with their business or organization. And 70% of workers keep their personal phones within eye contact at work. All of this is to say is that this mobile device that is so popular is only increasing in popularity. Now, as important as email, phone, and text is, the real giant in all of this is social networks. There are over 250 billion monthly users, and the granddaddy of those is, of course, Facebook with 2.74 plus billion. Okay, so we understand what drives folks to communicate, what channels drives them. Let's understand what will get them to actually pay attention to us. There are several buckets of content, if you will. Now, I want your eye to go to the biggest buckets that we've got here, or the biggest chat boxes, because those are the ones that really help us crack that or decode that relevance issue. People are really looking for features and stories, things that have a personal touch. Education, learning, professional intel is critical for a membership organization, and news of information that is really to the point and of the moment becomes really critical. The other things that we spend our time with are less important. And notice how small the marketing bubble is. There's a little bit of a reason why we have a disconnect, is because that becomes one of the largest bubble in so many of our organizations. And I want to tell you that the reason why I want you to go with those three things is because it's all about conversation. It's really all about driving the conversation. This is more important almost than any of the other goals. And the reason why I say this is because folks are craving the opportunity to connect with individuals in this virtual time. But even when we head back to in-person, and that will be soon, folks are still very used to this idea of conversation in a virtual space. Hence the growth of social media. So if we want to deal with that relevance thing, let me give you 5 check boxes that help us understand if what we're even putting out there is going to have the relevance and the connection that will get the conversation going. The first is, of course, that wonderful word relevance. Now, when I'm talking about the relevance, I'm talking about overcoming that stat where folks are saying that only 38% is relevant. So I'm talking about getting stuff into the hands, whether it's email or your e-letter or social media, that really speaks to your members. Secondly, and again, it's about the member. It's about the receiver, not about us. Way too much of our conversation starts with we announce, or we do, or come to our program. That's not about the receiver. There's parts of it that are, but the communication is the part that misses oftentimes. Timely, think hot button. Just communicating for the sake of saying something isn't going to get us where we need, and we'll be labeled as, I can get to that later. But the hot button issues, and we saw this in the pandemic, we see this on any safety issues, are the hot button issues, right? Personal. So what am I talking about personable? I'm talking about avoid the generic. I'm talking about where possible, segment your communications. Now, in social media, it's easy to do that because we know that our different members are usually connecting with us on, say, Facebook versus LinkedIn. So begin to think a little bit about that as you're communicating. And finally, and this may be the most important one, a conversation is in fact two-way. So in order for us to create the relevance and get the communications and the feedback, is we have to be open to that, which means it shouldn't always be about us sending an email that says, gimme, gimme, gimme. We could post questions. We could use polling. We could put something out there and then check out, for example, click-throughs and opens to find out what is important, and then relay that back to them. All right. So all of this just underscores absolutely the importance of us being focused on the member. So what do we drive all this communications with? You know, where's the starting point for us? Well, the starting point is content. Content becomes a magnet, if you will. Content allows us to attract people. It allows us to create value for our members. It starts the conversation. It engages folks and brings them into the conversation. And if we do this right, it's helping build our brand, and that creates our loyalty so that folks then open our emails. And of course, all of that done right is the retention driver. Folks are increasingly busy. We know that. So what they're going to look for is, first and foremost, does your organization have the content that drives the conversations that I'm interested in? And if so, I may come to your next meeting. I may get more involved in your particular group. Now, I want to talk about 3 big buckets of content for just a moment. And I think this is really critical because they can fall into marketing, PR, and news. Way too many of our communications fall into marketing. And marketing is just promotion and selling. Marketing is very properly done. It can be recipient focused, but too often it's just an ask, right? Now, PR is important because it's helping you tell your story and to build that loyalty around a reputation that matches your members' needs. But again, it's still in that promotion, public relations kinds of buckets. It's the news, it's the objective, the informing, the reporting. It's bringing content of importance in an unbiased way. It's being a trusted authority. That is really where folks are going to want to engage with us. And so as you look across this, really 2/3 should be in that third bucket or that news bucket, and then maybe split the other third between the marketing and the PR. I'm not saying don't do all of these. It's really about the mix, and it's about understanding that if we get the mix right, we can engage our members. Now, speaking of the mix, I want to give you a little formula that may help you explore this. And the formula is very simple. It's 30, 60, 10. So 30% of the content you're putting out there ought to be your own fresh content. 60% can be curated. So the largest part of your mix is going to be curated content. This is critical because this is where you are sharing what other people have. You're creating relationships with other individuals, with other groups. You're becoming a wonderful funnel for your members or a go-to place. And only 10% should be promotion. So if we really focused on this, and if you have a lot of stuff to promote, then find a way for you to be able to do some good news, some good curation in order to be able to solve your members' need and drive curiosity to have conversation with you. So the next question I think we need to ask is, okay, Peggy, you're talking about all this content. How do I do it? Well, let me give you what I would call the super 6 list, right? Blog posts, infographics, videos, case studies and testimonials, social media posts, and yes, webinars. What is this 6? What is this top 6? These are the most efficient formats for you to be able to take content and get it out to your members in a way that is engaging. Now, you will notice that I don't have e-letter here or newsletter here. I have blog posts because blog posts are super simple and they're fast. Don't start getting worried about, oh, a blog has to be X number of times. For a chapter-based organization or a state-based organization, putting one blog post a week, or if you can do more than one, great. But what you're going to be doing is little blurbs, and you're going to share. Remember that ratio. 60% of what you do can actually be stuff that you're shining the light on or lifting up. It could be news from your particular community that's relevant to your dental hygienist. It could be stories about your dental hygienist. It could be sharing relevant information from ADHA. I mentioned infographics and videos in a large part because they have incredible pull. Folks want to, they want to glam on to stuff that is visual and engages us in lots of different ways. And the other element, and this is the important one, is social media posts. That's where it's the easiest way for you to get folks to talk with you. But that last one, webinar, there can be a long tail to any of your webinars. You could create webinars and have an archive space, right? You could actually take a taped webinar and pull out sections of it that create content that can be shared easily. So there's lots of options for you in these super 6. I want to give you a case study that pulls all of these together in a way to kind of show you how the power of these elements can make a difference for you in putting together a communication strategy. So, I'm going to pull from Prsa Maryland, which is a chapter of a national organization that focuses on PR and communications folks. And the reason why I want to show you this as a case study is because, like so many other chapters, they came into COVID 2020 and found an amazing change that they had to handle. Now, they were coming off a pretty an engaging year in 2019, and they've been building over the last couple of years that engagement and that strength in their organization on a lot of different levels, from a financial level to a volunteerism level. And part of what made 2020 work was the way that they had already put together their communication strategy. It follows a template that is super simple, and it begins with understanding that you need a home base, a central repository that is robust and engaging, their website. Part of their website is their blog and web notes, which is their e-letter. And then you have outposts, and these outposts are both things that you run and or own, and things that your partners run or own. And they're an opportunity for you just to put out some information and collect some eyes, collect some intel, collect some feedback, and begin to do the conversation. So let's take a look at the Prsa case study a little bit more closely. So here we have their website. Now, what I want you to look at is the 2 main content areas. One of them is latest news, that's their blog, and the other one is upcoming events. And I'm not asking you to remake your websites. I'm asking you to think a little bit differently about potentially how you might use this as a home base. So you'll notice that on the left side of the screen, first of all, you see their social media icons, right? But right below that is a news feed generated from Google News of industry news. The reason why I want to mention this to you is because that news feed and the latest news feed are ways that they continue to put content in front of their members. Now, a critical part of their communication strategy and their home base is their blog and their web notes. Now, a point about the web notes. The web notes is simply a digest. So they start with the blog as the most robust part of this. And the blog is simply an opportunity for them to put up good information. They do it roughly weekly, sometimes less frequently. And then about once a quarter, they've changed their system quite a bit in web notes as they up their blog. They do this digest where they include it all. Now you'll see the email icon at the bottom of the screen on the right side, because a large part of what they do is also allow the blog to do some very single topic quick notices to their members via email. All of this is driven from their home base. So let's talk about some of their outposts. What you see here are their three main outposts. They are using LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. LinkedIn is the largest, and here's what they have discovered. They get more interaction and connectivity in LinkedIn. And so that's their focus. They spend most of their time on LinkedIn in terms of generating content and in terms of generating conversation. They do use Twitter and they do use Facebook because they have members that are there. I love the change to the Facebook featured image to less talk, because they really want to start I want to say drive some additional conversation there. Now, why are they on Twitter? They're on Twitter because that's a media source, and they are following local media, which has actually generated some return follows and some shares that have been very valuable for them. So beyond that group, they have what I would call their partner channels. So the first one you're seeing is their YouTube channel. They don't spend a lot of time on this, and I'm showing this to you to show that if it's part of a strategy that makes sense, it's just another outpost for people to stumble upon or find, and for them to take their videos and get them in an organized portal, if you will. But on the right side of the screen, you see two partner channels. The first is a podcast called Practically Social, and the one at the bottom is Capital Communicator, which is a news site. Now, the reason why I want to bring these up to you is because we're busy volunteers. I mean, how much communications can we be in control of? Well, sometimes you yield the control by finding media partners or other partners. Now, Jeff of Jeff and Charlie from Practically Social is a long-term member, but why should we do a podcast when they've got a great podcast? They promote us, we promote them. And it's a great conversation. And more on that relationship. The Capital Communicator is, I would say, the most important communications news service for the PR marketplace in our area. And so rather than trying to do a whole lot, we've narrowed it down to those. So what you see here is they've used the combination of their home base, some outposts that they control, and some outposts that they kind of share or partner with. So let me put this all together for you, how a strategy comes together. It begins with their June conference, Navigating the Next Normal. So let's follow the content trail here to show how they drove, they drove conversation, and they also drove engagement. So what they started with was a basic blog announcement that said, we're going virtual. Here's the scoop. This is what we're going to do. Here are some details. Here are some teases. Just a good basic blog post, which was shared, of course, to the partner channels, generated some coverage and some buzz over on the Capital Communicator, and got a connection or a mention in Practically Social. Now, here's what was really cool. By opening that door, one of the things that occurred was we had talked about one of the goals was, what are the new social media channels? Practically Social came back to us, and we were going to talk about TikTok, and said, oh, we are queuing up an interview with one of the big influencers on TikTok. How about we do that as a live broadcast during your conference? So see, we didn't have to do the podcast. The podcast was done at our conference. Now, we also ran this, of course, in web notes. Now, what is cool about this is that all the content that is in there was largely broken into smaller sections, what I call news bits, which became some weekly social posts, and we mixed them with speaker videos and shared links. We went to each of our speakers and we said, either do a video or give us a link or some kind of a video that you've used in the past. And we were able to integrate those with the social media posts. And of course, that allowed us to highlight and selected emails. So largely what we did was we started with a blog post and created these news bits that kept the conversation going. So what I want you to know about all of this is that we broke attendance records and broke sponsorship records, because we were able to get a buzz and have a conversation and a communications along and with our members. Now, one of the really powerful things is that when you're doing all of this, understand that you're creating content. So besides that live podcast that was done and became a really popular segment or edition for Practically Social, we also did a post-conference bonus content. So we talked with our sponsors, and one of our sponsors did a deep dive on a social media topic, Wikipedia, and gave us as the blog post. So we were able then to take this, following the content trail, to take a blog post announcement and pull it all the way through to after the session. So it does take some organization and some strategy, but it also allows us to create the communications. I pulled from PRSA a couple of examples that I just wanted to show you so that you could maybe come up with some other ideas or some ways that you can do this. So David Marshall is our current president. Now, I should mention that one of the real values that came out of the 2020 focus on content for PRSA Maryland was they actually seated the largest, most diverse, and freshest board at the end of 2020 to take them into 2021 than they'd had in a number of years. They also started a DEI committee, which they had not been able, it's been kind of on a to-do list, but they hadn't been able to get that off the ground. And they launched a series of new outreach programs, including a nonprofit assist day. All of this because the content was rich and engaging their members. And they were able to have conversations. So one of the content pieces, for example, was a conversation around how do we handle the pandemic and the social justice issues and racial unrest. That led to several people saying, well, what could PRSA do? Which led to the DEI committee, which led to us bringing additional people on board. Anyway, I give you that as sort of a side pass, because the investment in this actually is an investment in building your volunteer muscle as well as building your member engagement. David came on as president. And what I love is that he does these regular updates. Now, they put a fun video graphic on the front of it. You can, if you go to David and you scroll through his post, you'll be able to see this and play with it. What I love about this is these are quick updates, but notice how he tags a lot of folks. You can't see in this particular one, but he gets a really good following of links and shares out of these. So I love the fact that on every board meeting, they get a screen grab and they share it out on their social post. What I love about the one on the right is that the February meeting, they said the PRSA board is celebrating the love for the profession and love for our members. Now notice that these are getting in the order of 500 to 700 views, but most importantly, 16 and 10 and comments and shares. So they do an incredible job with video. And I want to share with this that one of the things that they did around their awards program, which happens at the end of the year, it was going to obviously be virtual. And so they invited folks to share the news. And look at these videos. You've got one with the comm team finding out how many awards that they were going to win. One of our award winners up at the top, and on the bottom is one of our individual award winners. The power of video, the connections that these videos made, and the comments. Now, sometimes finding content can be a little bit difficult. I love this next example because one of the things that they did during International Women's Month was they found stories, and actually it was pretty easy because they went to the Women's Museum of for Public Relations and Marketing, and they simply did this post where it was about 2 a week, women from the past and women from the current time who were involved in PR and celebrating it. So you guys have Dental Hygienist Week and Dental Hygienist Month. You have Dental Month. You have lots of opportunities for you to be highlighting elements. And these got lots of likes. Look at this, 10 likes on the one about Ethel Payne, for example. And in addition to the likes and the shares, they were using stories, right? And I told you in one of the bubbles that stories and features are part of creating relevance. So we also mentioned, and that last slide was an example of curating, right? So here's 2 more examples of curating. They simply take information, examples that they get from other folks and share it back out again. They do it in a timely fashion. So the one on the left is tips for professional video chat for interviews and meetings, done at the very beginning of the COVID pandemic time, when we were really stepping up our use of video for meetings, right? And on the other side, there was a webinar that had some information around Clubhouse app. And what was really cool was that they pulled a piece of that webinar and they shared it. So part of what PRSA does really well, and the reason why I want to share this with you, is particularly in their Twitter feed, they spend a lot of time sharing relevant stuff. So all of these are examples of stuff that they shared. I love the one at the top left because this is where the conversation comes in. So Mary Miles says that she's just joined this essential panel on equitable internships. And what I love is that PRSA on the same day responded with, "We can't wait, Mary." It was very simple. But it was a way of acknowledging Mary and creating some conversation. Now, I've mentioned video and I mentioned curated content. What I really want to bring you to is this idea of infographics. So on the left side of your screen is the PRSA Maryland Judging at a Glance. This is a project that we do each year. We judge some other chapter and a chapter judges ours. And it's a volunteer opportunity, and it's an ad hoc volunteer opportunity. It takes a couple of hours. We tend to get a lot of people involved in this who would not normally be involved in the organization. So this year, though, they captured the output of that judging. This became a very popular infographic. It told a story. It told a story of value, but it told a story about people that are engaged in our organization. Now, you may or may not be able to do your own infographic. On the other side of the screen is the infodemic, and this was something done from our national organization that we shared. So infographics, and by the way, that one got shared and reshared and reshared. Infographics become a way of drawing people in. All right, I need to share this last piece with you, and this is not PRSA. But in order for us to really engage conversation, we have to maybe sometimes go to the next level. This is a Facebook group that I belong to that is a must-view Facebook page for me. And the reason being is there is an incredible amount in our small community an incredible amount of conversation. It helps that the moderator or the admin does two things on a very regular basis. On the left side of the group, every Friday, she asks us to share our happiness or boost the happenings or brag. In other words, it's just a thing. You'll see here was 8. That was one of the smaller, smaller ones. But people will share all kinds of things and brag you. It's testimonials, really, to the fact that this is a community. In the middle, you see that she does the question of the week. Some of them are light, like this one. Are you a morning person or a night owl? Other ones can be something around what is your favorite productivity tool? But she's a question of the week. Now you can see here 36 comments. And finally, she encourages folks to post their own questions and requests. And in fact, if you send her something, she'll oftentimes say, please post that, and give you the opportunity and the nudge for that. And you can see in this particular one, someone was looking for examples for a webinar and got 14 comments around suggestions. So a large part of what we can do is simply step outside of having an answer to asking a question. Help our members post, and then really be involved and engaged in making sure that they get some connections. In fact, on that last point, one of the times there was a post and I had missed it, and Kiki sent me a quick little note and said, did you see that post? And I immediately went in and responded. So there's a way to get conversation going. Take some time. I understand that. So put together a team of people. All right. So how are we going to act on all of this? How are we going to get to, is anybody there? Is anybody listening? I got a couple of suggestions for you. You're going to pick 1 or 2 or 3 or all of them that are going to make a difference for you today. Begin with that home base. And then from that home base, I want you to think conversation. What do members care about and want to talk about? Then pick a prime tool, maybe an e-letter or a blog, and a prime social channel, maybe Facebook, maybe LinkedIn, and allow that to be the place that generates that give and take and those likes and shares. Obviously coming from the conversation. I want you to potentially ID your sources. So who should you follow and who should you share? It's a lot easier to generate content and conversation when you don't have to come up with it all the time. So who do you follow? Who do you share? Who do you look to that is a valuable resource that you can bring to your members? Now, to make all of this happen, I suggest you put together a comm team. Every time we ask for a newsletter editor, people go, right? So instead of doing that, say, come on, we want a comm team, and there are conversation starters. And we're looking for people who just be a pool of people who will create, who will write, who will post, who will share, who will like. We want you to get the conversation in our group, our constituent group, our state, or our component. We want to get the conversation going, and we want to ask questions and answer questions, and we want to help people find each other. A comm team can do that. Create some fun times where they sit down and brainstorm on ideas. Don't make it a big, heavy lift. Encourage them to just be the nudgers, right? And finally, I want you to add personal email and phone calls, because at the end of the day, you've got to get that personal part in there. All right. So we've had a good conversation today. I think we've been able to decode the question of how do we make that communication connection. We've given you a couple of strategies. So let's act.